There is a paradox at the heart of achievement that few men ever see coming. The very qualities that drive you to win, intelligence, discipline, relentless drive, are the same forces that, left unchecked, can quietly undermine your future. I wrote this book because I have watched too many smart, capable men sabotage themselves at the peak of their success, not through laziness or ignorance, but through the silent, invisible workings of their own ego. If you are holding this book, you likely have a history of wins behind you. You know what it means to overcome resistance, to execute under pressure, to build a reputation on results. But you may also sense, perhaps for the first time, that your greatest threat is no longer external. It is internal. It is the subtle shift that happens when your confidence, once earned and healthy, begins to harden into certainty. When your track record becomes a shield, blinding you to feedback, that warning signs, or the need to adapt. When you start to believe your own press. The ego trap is not a theory. It is a pattern, a repeatable sequence that has quietly destroyed careers, relationships, and fortunes. It is the hidden cost of success that no one warns you about. This book is a manual for recognizing and dismantling that pattern before it turns your strengths into liabilities. Inside, you will learn why victory is so dangerous for the ambitious mind. You will see how the ego recruits your intelligence to defend itself, how past wins become psychological leverage, and how unchecked certainty compounds into catastrophic mistakes. You will discover the warning signs that even the smartest men routinely miss, and you will build a practical system for catching ego-driven errors in real time before they cost you everything you have built. This is not a book about humility for its own sake. It is a book about survival, adaptation, and the architecture of long-term winning. The men who endure are not those who never make mistakes, but those who can correct themselves faster than their ego can defend them. The new standard of strength is not unshakable conviction, but flexible, rapid self-correction. If you are ready to protect your potential from its greatest enemy, your own unchecked success, then turn the page. The trap is real. The way out is here. Chapter 1. The Trap. The most dangerous thing that can happen to a smart man is a winning streak. You are reading this because you have already started accumulating victories. You have a track record. You know how to operate, how to execute, and how to push through resistance. You expect those past wins to act as an unbreakable foundation for your future. But I am going to show you exactly how those same victories are quietly sabotaging your judgment right now. By the end of this chapter, you will understand why your own success history is the greatest threat to your future decisions, and how a simple shift in your operating system can protect you from the catastrophic mistakes that wipe out other highly capable men. The real enemy of your future is not stupidity. It is not ignorance, a low intelligence quotient, or a lack of effort. The enemy is your own ego, armed with the undeniable evidence of your past wins. This is the ego trap. It is the exact moment your past victories start making your current judgment harder to challenge. Every time you succeed, your brain stores that win as hard evidence. It builds a compelling case that your judgment is flawless. Over time, those memories do not stay neutral. They become psychological leverage. They make your confidence feel earned, even in areas where you have absolutely no experience. This hidden mechanism is called success amplification. Every victory tells your brain to trust itself faster the next time. Your confidence rises much faster than your actual calibration. You start relying on your internal certainty more than the actual quality of your reasoning. This is why capable, ambitious men are in far more danger than careless men. A careless man knows he might be wrong, so he checks his work. A successful man assumes his resume proves he is right, so he skips the inspection entirely. The trap hides in plain sight because it disguises itself as virtue. You call it deep conviction when it is really just stubborn resistance to new information. You call it relying on your experience when it is really massive overreach into a domain you do not understand. You call it maintaining high standards when it is really just your pride defending itself from being questioned by others. This hits you after you make progress, not before. Early wins reduce your healthy fear of being wrong. Repeated praise from your peers makes self-doubt feel unnecessary. Soon, your competence in one specific area starts leaking into areas you have not earned the right to be confident in. You must face an uncomfortable identity-level truth right now. You are not failing because you are weak. You are failing because your strengths have stopped being supervised. Your wins become witnesses for your ego. The smarter your defense, the harder your fall. Confidence without correction always becomes self-destruction. The compounding cost of unchecked certainty. If you let this mechanism run in the background, the cost compounds quietly until it bankrupts you. One bad decision creates a story you tell yourself to justify it. Repeated bad decisions create a pattern of behavior. Defended patterns eventually harden into your identity. Once your identity is tied to a bad strategy, you will burn your own life down to protect it. In your career, this damage feels like strategy. You end up staying in the wrong role for years because leaving feels like admitting you were wrong. You double down on a weak business plan simply because your name is attached to it, and pivoting feels like a public defeat. As your status rises, you become increasingly harder to coach. You view advice as an insult to your track record, and you push away the exact mentors who could save you from yourself. In your relationships, the damage feels like strength. You become an expert at winning arguments while completely losing trust. You use your sharp intelligence to corner your partner with logic instead of connecting with their reality. You confuse emotional control with emotional honesty, building a wall of rationalization that leaves you technically right but entirely alone. You win the battle of words, but you destroy the foundation of the relationship. With your money, the damage feels like pure confidence. You start taking bigger risks with the same shallow depth of analysis. You borrow certainty from old wins in a completely different market or context, assuming your golden touch transfers everywhere. You refuse to exit a losing position because taking the loss threatens your identity as a winner. You hold on until the market forces you out, paying a massive premium for your pride. Eventually, the reputation damage becomes impossible to reverse. You become known as brilliant but difficult. Because you argue with every piece of criticism, people simply stop giving you honest feedback. You end up surrounded by agreement and completely starved of correction. You become the king of a shrinking island. Look at Elizabeth Holmes. Her story is not just about corporate fraud. It is a masterclass in confidence hardened into delusion. Early praise and massive funding convinced her that her vision was reality, and her ego refused to accept the technical failures. She defended her identity until it destroyed her company. Look at Travis Kalanick. His sheer force of will built a global empire. But that same brilliance was undermined by an unchecked ego that viewed all dissent as weakness. The lesson from these spectacular falls is absolute. Success does not remove your blind spots. It enlarges them. The invisible price of doing nothing. If you do nothing about this, your mistakes will not necessarily become more frequent, but they will become less visible to you and vastly more expensive. The danger for a smart man is not constant, daily failure. The danger is the occasional catastrophic misread that wipes out years of progress. Because your brain is so good at building defenses, your errors will actually feel more justified to you over time, not less. You will trust yourself the absolute most in the exact moments when you should be inspecting yourself the hardest. You will become impossible to help. When someone tries to point out a flaw in your logic, you will hear their feedback as an insult to your intelligence. You will treat dissent as disrespect. Because you push away early warnings, correction will only arrive later, louder, and much more painfully when reality finally breaks your door down. The people around you will learn that bringing you the truth is a punishing experience, so they will simply let you fail. Worse, you will mistake your ability to explain something for the truth. Long, articulate arguments will replace clean, honest thinking. You will use complexity as armor to fend off simple questions. Your sophistication will serve only to hide your simple, foundational errors from yourself and everyone around you. You will build elegant castles on top of quicksand. This is the dividing line between how winners and losers handle their own minds. Winners fear blind confidence far more than they fear temporary doubt. Losers fear looking wrong more than they fear actually becoming wrong. Winners build systems to check their thinking before their success turns toxic. Losers wait until the crash to wonder what happened. The new standard of strength. By the time you finish your first pass through this system, you will build a working awareness of your own ego patterns. You will learn to recognize the specific disguises your ego uses to protect itself from scrutiny. You will train your ear to hear the exact phrases that reveal your own rationalization in real time. You will be able to identify the precise moments where your confidence has dangerously outrun your actual evidence. You will catch yourself much earlier in live decisions. Instead of realizing you were defensive 3 days after an argument, you will pause the moment a familiar phrase appears in your speech. You will learn to separate the cold facts of a decision from the fragile pride you have attached to it. You will delay major commitments whenever you detect ego contamination in your reasoning, saving yourself from unforced errors. You will install a basic, unbreakable correction system. You will run an outsider test on your most defended decisions to strip away your internal bias. You will use a weekly review to audit your last 7 days of choices without emotional drama. You will make visible course corrections before the next week even begins, ensuring that small leaks never turn into flooded basements. Most importantly, you will gain a new standard of strength. You will stop defining strength as unshakable certainty. You will start defining strength as fast, clean self-correction. You will finally understand that changing your mind is not a sign of weakness when the evidence improves. It is the ultimate flex of a man who controls his ego rather than being controlled by it. The architecture of your defense system. To achieve this, you must move through a specific sequence of steps. First, you will learn the mechanism. You must understand exactly how your intelligence gets recruited by your ego and why simply being aware of cognitive biases does not solve the problem. You have to accept that your mind is not automatically on your side. Next, you will name the patterns. You will learn the 6 masks your ego wears as a practical taxonomy. You will attach each of these masks to real decisions in your work, your relationships, and your money. Naming these patterns increases your ability to retain them under extreme pressure. Then, you will memorize the signals. You will learn the 8 phrases that act as real-time warning lights. You will recognize the repeated verbal signatures of your own rationalization, using your everyday language as a fast self-detection tool. After that, you will expose the hidden threat of the success tax and your own blind spots. You will use outsider perspective to break your own self-deception. You will review your actual words rather than your noble intentions, treating your own certainty as a prompt for immediate inspection. With those tools in hand, you will run the weekly audit. You will review your major decisions, scoring your ego contamination without shame or drama, and turning that insight into concrete action. Finally, you will apply this entire filter to the hard calls in the high-stakes areas of your career, your relationships, and your finances. I chose these steps and put them in this exact order for a reason. You cannot fix what you have not named. Explanation must come before interruption. Categories must come before pattern recall. Language cues must come before live detection. This system is built for real-life use, not for academic admiration. Short labels survive the pressure of a boardroom or a heated argument. Weekly repetition beats fleeting emotional motivation. Immediate application turns passive consumption into permanent behavior change. The cues are designed to work in your meetings, your texts, and your silent self-talk. The ultimate divide between winning and losing. In this field, your attitude toward your own success dictates your survival. Winners treat their past wins as context, never as permission to stop thinking. Winners assume their confidence is a wild animal that constantly needs supervision. Winners build correction systems while things are going well, long before their ego makes that self-reflection impossible. Losers do the exact opposite. Losers use their track record as a shield to deflect criticism. Losers hear honest feedback as a personal attack. Losers would rather spend their energy defending a terrible decision than simply repairing it and moving forward. They protect their pride until it costs them everything they have built. The core identity shift you must make right now is absolute. You must stop asking how to look right. You must start asking how to get it right. You must replace your pride in certainty with a deep, unbreakable pride in your ability to correct yourself. The man who keeps winning long-term is not the man with the biggest ego. It is the man who can catch his own ego early and correct without drama. You now know the trap exists. You know that your past victories are the exact raw materials your mind will use to build your next spectacular failure. But simply knowing the trap is out there will not save you. The trap does not operate on magic. It operates on a hidden machine running quietly inside your own head. The next threat you face is brutal because the call is coming from inside the house. Soon, we will uncover the engine that powers this self-deception, and you will see exactly how your own intelligence might be helping your ego far more than it is helping your future. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Grow to the Top and activate notifications to receive more self-improvement tips that will supercharge your growth. And make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you for your support. Chapter 2, The Engine. You have been told your entire life that your intelligence is your greatest asset. You have been praised for your ability to process information, solve complex problems, and outthink the competition. Because of this, you have developed a comforting fantasy. You believe that because you are smart, articulate, and informed, you are automatically protected from self-deception. You assume that bad reasoning is a disease that only infects the uneducated, the lazy, or the highly emotional. I need to destroy that fantasy right now. The hard truth is that your intelligence does not protect you from the trap. In fact, your intelligence is the very thing that makes the trap so dangerous. You are likely using your brain to protect your ego, not to improve your judgment. The sharper your reasoning skills, the cleaner and more bulletproof your excuses can sound. When a man with average intelligence makes a mistake, his excuses are usually clumsy and obvious. When a highly intelligent man makes a mistake, he builds a fortress of rationalization so elegant and sophisticated that he completely fools himself. You might be thinking that you are safe because you read books on psychology. You know the vocabulary. You understand confirmation bias, sunk cost fallacies, and cognitive dissonance. This is the myth we must kill immediately. Awareness alone does not save you. In fact, the meta-failure of self-improvement is that learning about cognitive biases often makes the problem worse. Once you know the language of bias, you simply use that language defensively. You become an expert at diagnosing the flaws in your boss, your competitors, and your partner while granting yourself a permanent exemption. Information without a structured interruption system simply turns into decorative wisdom. Knowledge becomes camouflage. You must face an identity-level confrontation today. In your most critical moments, you are not just thinking, you are defending. You are not objectively analyzing the data. You are prosecuting reality until it agrees with the conclusion your ego has already chosen. Your brain is a lawyer before it is a judge. The more elegant your excuse sounds, the more careful you should be. Smart men get caught harder in this web because a superior vocabulary increases the power of persuasive self-talk. Your prior successes have lowered your internal resistance to bad certainty, and your high verbal skill helps you win arguments you absolutely should lose. The lawyer inside your head. To stop this from happening, you must understand the hidden machine operating beneath your conscious thoughts. This is the rationalization engine. It runs on a brutally simple sequence. Your ego picks the destination based on what feels safe, powerful, or vindicating. Your intelligence then builds the route to get there, gathering only the evidence that supports the journey. Finally, your language decorates the defense, making the entire process sound like a principled, logical decision. Your mind is not a built-in truth detector. It is a tool, and tools serve the hand that holds them. This is the orthogonality principle applied to everyday life. Intelligence is completely goal agnostic. It can serve the pursuit of truth, but it can just as easily serve the pursuit of status, comfort, or self-preservation. If your ego wants accuracy, your intelligence will help you find it. But if your ego wants to protect your self-image, your intelligence will help you build a flawless lie. This happens through a mechanism called identity protective cognition. When your identity gets tied to a specific belief, a business plan, a job title, or a relationship dynamic, your reasoning shifts from discovery to defense. A threat to your identity feels exactly like a physical threat to your survival. This is why presenting cold facts to a man whose pride is on the line almost never works. You cannot defeat an identity threat with a spreadsheet. The engine operates through 5 distinct components. First is the identity hook, the moment a decision becomes attached to your sense of worth. Next is the defensive story, the immediate narrative your brain drafts to explain away any negative feedback. Then comes the certainty loop, where you actively seek out only the information that confirms your brilliance. This is followed by the dissent filter, a psychological wall that automatically categorizes anyone who disagrees with you as uninformed, jealous, or hostile. Finally, the engine produces the post hoc justification, the polished, logical explanation you deliver to the world to prove you were right all along. The casualties of a defended mind. This machine does not operate in a vacuum. It destroys real value in your daily life. Look at your career. Think about the strategy you refuse to change. You designed the plan. You pitched it. Your name is on it. When colleagues offer criticism, it feels deeply personal. Instead of updating the strategy based on new market data, you keep explaining it. You defend your effort instead of measuring your actual results. Or consider the role you refuse to leave. You chose this job, so walking away feels like a self-indictment. You reinterpret massive warning signs as temporary setbacks. You call your endurance a sign of strength, when in reality it is just ego friction keeping you paralyzed. The engine is even more destructive in your relationships. Think about the argument you feel you absolutely must win. You use your precision, your memory, and your command of language to completely overpower a simple emotional truth presented by your partner. You correct their wording. You debate the timeline of events. You avoid the actual issue of trust or connection by turning the living room into a courtroom. You leave the conversation technically right, having successfully defended your position, but your relationship is fundamentally weaker. You won the debate, but you lost the trust. With your money, the engine forces you to defend terrible bets. After committing capital to an investment or a business venture, you immediately start seeking confirming data. You dismiss bad signs, market shifts, and missed targets as mere noise. You feel increasingly attached to the position because backing off would require you to challenge your self-image as a savvy operator. You ride the loss all the way down because your ego refuses to let you cut the cord. Consider the spectacular rise and fall of Elizabeth Holmes. Her story is rarely understood correctly. The real lesson is not about corporate scandal or intentional fraud from day one. The lesson is about what happens when identity fuses with a story so tightly that correction becomes psychologically unbearable. She built an identity as a generational genius. When the technology failed to match the vision, her rationalization engine went into overdrive. She did not pause to correct the science. She escalated the defense. She filtered out dissenting engineers, built defensive stories for investors, and protected her identity at all costs. Your version of this may be smaller and less public, but the internal mechanism is exactly the same. The interruption protocol. You cannot permanently dismantle the engine because it is built into your neurobiology, but you can learn to catch it and cut the power before it drives you off a cliff. The primary detection method is a single brutal inquiry called the defense question. When you feel the heat of certainty rising in your chest, you must stop and ask yourself what exactly you are trying to protect right now. Are you protecting the project, or are you protecting your pride? Then, force yourself to ask what you would say if you had to honestly argue the exact opposite side of your current position. Finally, Ask yourself what specific, tangible evidence would actually change your mind. If the answer is nothing, you are not reasoning. You are defending a religion. When you detect the engine running, you must execute a 3-step interrupt. Step 1 is to explicitly name the identity threat. Admit to yourself that you are afraid of looking foolish, losing status, or admitting a past mistake. Step 2 is to aggressively separate the decision from your worth as a man. Being wrong about a marketing campaign or a stock pick does not make you fundamentally incompetent. Step 3 is to delay your final commitment until the opposing case has been clearly and fairly stated. There are specific tricks to mastering this protocol. You must learn to treat fast certainty as a yellow light, not a green light. When you feel instantly, absolutely right about a complex issue, your engine is likely doing the driving. You must also learn to treat your own defensiveness as data. The moment you feel the urge to raise your voice or attack someone's character in a debate, you have just received a massive signal that your ego is under threat. If your explanation keeps growing longer and more complex while your actual evidence stays weak, you must stop talking. If someone's dissent feels deeply disrespectful to you, your ego is already heavily involved. This is the ultimate contrast between winners and losers. Winners test their conclusions before life tests them. Losers defend their conclusions until life humiliates them. Winners separate their self-respect from the need to be right in public. Losers fuse their self-respect to their opinions, ensuring that every disagreement is a fight to the death. The traps inside the fix. As you begin to apply this protocol, your engine will try to hijack the very tools you are using to stop it. You will face several predictable failure modes. First, you might confuse your confidence with actual clarity. You will feel so good about a decision that you skip the interruption protocol entirely. You fix this by forcing yourself to write down the exact evidence that would change your mind before you take action. If you cannot write it down, you do not have clarity. You only have an emotion. Second, you might start performing open-mindedness instead of actually practicing it. You will nod thoughtfully in meetings, say all the right words about valuing feedback, and then go do exactly what you wanted to do anyway. You fix this by forcing yourself to state the strongest, honest case against your position in plain language, out loud, in front of the people who disagree with you. Third, you might seek feedback only from safe people. You will ask for advice from colleagues or friends who already share your worldview, ensuring you get the validation your ego craves disguised as objective counsel. You fix this by intentionally choosing one highly credible person who is naturally wired to disagree with you and giving them permission to tear your idea apart. Fourth, you might turn every single challenge into a debate. When someone brings you a valid critique, your sharp mind will instantly formulate 3 counter-arguments. You fix this by installing a hard rule. You must ask one genuine, clarifying question before you are allowed to make a single defensive statement. Finally, you might try to hide behind complexity. When your reasoning is challenged, you will flood the zone with jargon, historical context, and nuanced variables to make the other person feel unequipped to argue with you. You fix this by forcing yourself to summarize your entire reasoning in 3 simple sentences that a teenager could easily understand. If you cannot make it simple, you are hiding something from yourself. The evolution of clean judgment. As you practice interrupting the engine, you will move through 3 distinct levels of mastery. At the good level, you will start noticing when you are getting defensive. You will still make mistakes, but you will catch at least one contaminated decision after the fact. You will look back at an argument and realize you were protecting your pride. Most importantly, you will begin to physically feel the difference in your body between the tension of explanation and the calm of genuine inquiry. At the excellent level, your timing improves. You will pause mid-defense. Right in the middle of a heated meeting or a tense conversation with your partner, you will stop, take a breath, and restate the opposing case. You will stop treating criticism as disrespect. Your decisions will become noticeably slower in areas where caution is required, and incredibly clean and fast in areas where the evidence is clear. At the best level, you become a man who is exceptionally hard to fool. You reach this tier because you officially stop volunteering as your own defense attorney. You develop the rare ability to update your worldview and change your mind without suffering an identity collapse. The ultimate payoff is that other people will begin to trust your judgment far more than they ever did before. They will trust you not because you are always right, but because they see how fast and cleanly you correct yourself when you are wrong. You now understand the machine. You know that your intelligence is a mercenary that will gladly work for your ego if you do not supervise it. You know that the engine runs on identity protection, and you know how to cut the power. But the machine does not operate out in the open. It does not announce its presence. It survives scrutiny by wearing disguises that sound noble, wise, patient, and highly informed. The engine hides behind faces that you deeply respect. Soon, we will pull back the curtain on the specific disguises your ego wears to trick you into defending it. Chapter 3: 6 Masks. You probably expect your worst enemy to look like an enemy. When you think about ego, you picture arrogance. You picture a man pounding his fist on a boardroom table, shouting down his subordinates, or making reckless bets just to prove he is the smartest person in the room. If your ego always announced itself with that kind of loud, childish chest beating, you would catch it every single time. You are too smart to fall for obvious arrogance. But your ego knows this. It knows that if it presents itself as raw pride, your intelligence will immediately reject it. So it adapts. It stops trying to overpower you and starts trying to seduce you. It slowly puts on a disguise. It wraps itself in the exact qualities you admire most about yourself. Instead of revealing everything at once, we need to carefully unmask this deception. We need to look at the specific, recurring faces your ego wears to survive your own scrutiny. By the end of this chapter, you will possess a practical taxonomy of deception. You will learn the 6 specific disguises your ego uses to hijack your decisions, and you will learn how to rip them off before the damage is done. The armor of virtue. Ego hides best when it sounds virtuous. You do not lose to your ego when it looks petty or foolish. You lose to your ego when it sounds principled, informed, patient, or fiercely loyal. The most dangerous lie you will ever tell yourself is the one that flawlessly flatters your self-image. Your worst decisions are right now hiding inside your best-sounding stories. You are at your absolute most vulnerable when your explanation for a bad choice makes you feel noble. You must confront a deeply uncomfortable reality about your own mind. Your ego wears a tailored suit, not a bright red warning label. Noble language can, and constantly does, hide incredibly weak thinking. If the story you are telling yourself about a stalled project or a broken relationship makes you look like a tragic hero or a misunderstood genius, you need to inspect that story twice. Rationalization works best when it wears moral or strategic clothing. Therefore, the solution to this problem is not to simply tell yourself to be less egotistical. That advice is far too vague to be useful in the real world. The real solution is category recognition. You must give the pattern a label. You must link it to a common script. You must attach it to concrete domains in your life. Compression improves recall. You can remember 6 specific disguises far more easily than you can remember 20 scattered examples of bad behavior. Each of these disguises will become a mental hook, allowing you to identify your own self-deception midstream instead of weeks after the damage is done. The taxonomy of deception. The first disguise is the principled stand. This is ego protection masquerading as deeply held values. The verbal signature of this disguise is telling yourself that you are just standing on your standards. In reality, the hidden threat this disguise protects you from is humiliation. You refuse to back down from a failing strategy or a pointless argument because you have convinced yourself that yielding is a violation of your core principles. You elevate a simple difference of opinion or a minor tactical error into a massive moral crusade. The second disguise is the informed decision. This is selective evidence gathering designed to support a conclusion your ego has already chosen. The verbal signature here is telling people that you have done the research. The hidden threat this disguise protects you from is uncertainty. You read 50 pages of data, but you only highlight the 3 paragraphs that prove you were right all along. You use the sheer volume of your analysis to intimidate anyone who questions your judgment, confusing the weight of your research with the accuracy of your conclusion. The third disguise is the timing excuse. This is permanent delay, disguised as strategic patience. The verbal signature is the classic claim that now just is not the right time. The hidden threat this disguise protects you from is visible failure. If you never launch the product, never have the hard conversation, and never exit the bad investment, you never have to face a definitive loss. You convince yourself that you are being a master strategist by waiting for perfect conditions, when in reality, your ego is just terrified of being tested in the open market. The fourth disguise is the sunk investment. This is blind loyalty to a past version of yourself, disguised as honorable commitment. The verbal signature is telling yourself that you have put way too much into this to stop now. The hidden threat this disguise protects you from is wasted identity. You cannot bear the thought that the last 3 years of your career or your relationship were spent on the wrong path. So, to protect your ego from the pain of that realization, you decide to waste the next 3 years defending the exact same mistake. The fifth disguise is the consensus shield. This is the act of borrowing confidence from the agreement of others. The verbal signature is pointing out that everyone else sees it this way too. The hidden threat this disguise protects you from is the terror of standing alone. When your internal conviction is weak, your ego seeks safety in the herd. You use the agreement of your colleagues, your friends, or the market to shield your fragile reasoning from independent scrutiny. The sixth disguise is the exception claim. This is the arrogant belief that your specific case is uniquely exempt from the normal rules of reality. The verbal signature is the insistence that your situation is different. The hidden threat this disguise protects you from is submitting to reality. You acknowledge that a certain behavior ruins other men, but you convince yourself that your superior intellect or your unique circumstances grant you immunity from the consequences. The disguises in action. These disguises do not live in textbooks. They live in your daily calendar. In your career, the principled stand looks like refusing to pivot on a weak business plan because changing course feels like a public surrender. You call it holding the line, but everyone else sees it as stubbornness. The informed decision looks like reading only the industry data that supports a risky job move you already want to make, completely ignoring the massive red flags in the compensation structure. The sunk investment looks like staying in a dead-end executive role simply because the years you have already spent there feel sacred to your identity. In your relationships, the principled stand looks like calling your wounded pride a boundary. You refuse to forgive a minor slight because you claim it violates your standards of respect, when really, you just want to punish your partner. The consensus shield looks like citing 3 of your friends who agree with your side of the argument, instead of actually addressing your partner's valid objection. The exception claim looks like insisting that your specific conflict cannot possibly be judged by the normal standards of honesty and mutual respect, because your stress levels are uniquely high. With your money, the timing excuse looks like delaying an exit from a bleeding position while calling your paralysis strategic patience. The informed decision looks like cherry-picking financial analysis to support a move you want to make purely for the adrenaline rush. The sunk investment looks like doubling your emotional and financial commitment to a failing venture simply because your capital is already tied up and walking away feels like a permanent stain on your record as a winner. Look at the leadership style of Travis Kalanick during his peak. This is a perfect historical example of the principled stand and the exception claim operating at the highest levels of business. His sheer force, speed, and conviction built a massive empire. But eventually, those exact same traits turned into a self-justifying rigidity. The rules did not apply to his company because his situation was different. The cultural issues were ignored because he was standing on the principle of fierce execution. The scale of his empire was massive, but the psychological masks he wore are the exact same masks you wear in your own life. Force and conviction are incredible tools, but when they become disguises for an ego that refuses to be corrected, they will eventually burn your empire to the ground. The recognition protocol. To catch these disguises, you must deploy a specific detection method called the mask match. When you feel yourself digging your heels in, you must stop and ask yourself which of the 6 masks best describes the story you are currently telling yourself. You must ask what exact emotional threat this mask is protecting you from feeling. Is it shame? Is it the fear of looking stupid? Is it the pain of wasted time? Then, you must ask what you would do right now if you did not need to protect that specific feeling. Once you identify the disguise, you run the correction protocol. You name, expose, and replace. First, you name the mask in one clean, brutal phrase. You say to yourself, "I am using the timing excuse." Second, you expose the cost of keeping it. You admit that waiting another 6 months is going to cost you your reputation or your capital. Third, you replace the disguise with one truth-first action. You make the phone call, you cut the loss, or you apologize without adding a defense at the end. There are rules to making this work. If the story you are telling yourself makes you sound incredibly virtuous, you must inspect it harder than any other story. If your delay keeps repeating month after month, timing is probably not the actual issue. If the agreement of the crowd feels like proof that you are right, you must stop and check the actual independent evidence. If leaving a situation feels deeply humiliating, sunk cost is likely sitting in the driver's seat. If your case feels uniquely special and exempt from the rules, you must aggressively test whether that is reality or just ego theater. Winners distrust flattering stories. Losers fall deeply in love with them. Winners ask what the mask is costing them right now, completely ignoring what it might have protected them from in the past. Losers cling to the mask because they would rather lose their money, their time, and their relationships than lose their carefully crafted self-image. The traps inside the labels. As you start using this taxonomy, your ego will try to weaponize the labels against you. You might start seeing every single problem as the exact same mask. You might decide that everything you do is a sunk investment, blinding yourself to the other disguises. You fix this by forcing yourself to identify the exact emotional threat you are trying to avoid in each unique situation. Shame, uncertainty, loss, and exposure all require different masks. You might successfully label the mask, but keep the exact same destructive behavior. You will proudly tell yourself that you are using the timing excuse, and then you will continue to delay the decision anyway. You fix this by attaching one visible action with a strict deadline to every single mask you identify. Insight without action is just entertainment. You might use these labels mainly to diagnose other people. You will start pointing out the consensus shield in your coworkers or the exception claim in your partner. You fix this by installing a hard rule that you must apply every single mask to one of your own current decisions before you are allowed to analyze anyone else. You might confuse a real, genuine principle with the principled stand. You fix this by asking yourself what specific evidence or outcome would actually make you revise your position. A man with real principles knows exactly where his boundaries are, but he does not use them to avoid accountability. Finally, you might try to hide permanently inside the exception claim. You fix this by demanding one concrete, testable reason why your case truly differs from the historical norm. If you cannot prove it on paper, you are not an exception. You are just next in line. The evolution of clarity. As you master this taxonomy, your clarity will evolve through 3 distinct levels. At the good level, you will be able to identify the mask immediately after you make a mistake. Your postmortems will become brutally accurate. You will look back at a failed negotiation and realize you were wearing the principled stand. You will begin to notice your own favorite disguise, the one you reach for most often when you feel threatened. At the excellent level, You will identify the mask during the actual decision-making process. You will interrupt your own self-deception before you commit capital or ruin a conversation. You will stop mistaking your own noble language for the objective truth. You will feel the urge to use the timing excuse, and you will force yourself to act instead. At the best level, you become unusually hard to flatter with your own self-story. You course-correct faster, with almost zero emotional waste. You no longer need to spend 3 days agonizing over a bruised ego. People around you will begin to trust your judgment on a much deeper level because they will sense that your reasoning is less defended, more honest, and completely stripped of ego theater. Naming the masks gives you incredible power over your own mind. It allows you to categorize the deception and strip away the noble clothing your ego wears. But naming the masks is only the beginning of the tactical system. In the heat of a high-stakes moment, when the pressure is on and the adrenaline is pumping, you might not have the time to sit back and analyze which of the 6 disguises is currently active. You need something much faster. In real life, ego almost always leaks through your language long before it hardens into an action. You need warning lights that you can actually hear in the middle of a meeting, in your text messages, in your arguments, and in your silent self-talk. Soon, we will uncover the exact verbal triggers that expose your ego in real time, giving you the power to stop a catastrophic decision before the sentence even leaves your mouth. Chapter 4. 8 Phrases. Most bad decisions are completely obvious only after the cost arrives. You look back at a blown negotiation, a fractured relationship, or a terrible financial investment, and you wonder how you could have been so blind. You read books that give you brilliant rear-view wisdom. They teach you how to analyze your mistakes after the wreckage has already been cleared. But rear-view wisdom is practically useless when you are in the heat of the moment. You do not need another framework for understanding why you failed yesterday. You need a live-fire detection system that works right now, in the middle of the decision, before the damage is done. You need a dashboard warning light for your own mind, and you already have one. It is your language. Before your behavior hardens into a permanent action, it almost always appears in your speech. It shows up in the words you say aloud in a meeting, the messages you type on your phone, and the silent scripts you rehearse in your head while staring at the ceiling. Thoughts are blurry and slippery, but language is concrete. Words repeat. Patterns in your speech are easy to hear, easy to remember, and easy to interrupt. Your mouth often reveals exactly what your ego is desperately trying to hide. I'm going to give you the 8 specific verbal warning signs that reveal ego-driven rationalization in real time. You have already said some of these phrases this week. The issue is not whether you are smart enough to know better. The issue is whether you can train your ear to hear yourself in time. If you can hear the phrase, you can stop the damage. Repeated phrases are repeated traps. We are going to slowly unpack this audible alarm system so you can carry it into your next high-stakes conversation. The architecture of spoken deception. Your ego relies on a very predictable script. When your reasoning shifts from honest inquiry to desperate defense, your vocabulary changes. You stop using words that invite truth and start using words that build armor. One phrase alone might not prove that your ego has completely taken over, but the repeated use of these specific 8 phrases is a massive red flag. The first phrase is telling yourself or others that everyone else is doing it. On the surface, this sounds like you are just observing market trends or social norms. Under the surface, this phrase signals that social proof has entirely replaced your independent analysis. You are borrowing confidence from the crowd because your own reasoning cannot support the weight of the decision. The second phrase is the claim that the timing is not right yet. We discussed this disguise in the previous chapter, but you must learn to hear the exact words. When you say this, you are replacing courage with delay. You are waiting for a mythical perfect moment that will never arrive, simply to protect yourself from the possibility of a visible failure today. The third phrase is a defensive pivot where you say, you know you said that, but in context, you meant something else. This is a history rewrite replacing accountability. You are caught in a contradiction, and instead of simply admitting that your previous stance was wrong or poorly communicated, your ego forces you to rewrite the past to protect your image of flawless consistency. The fourth phrase is the heavy sigh, where you admit you have already put too much into this to stop now. This is sunk cost completely replacing your judgment. You are letting the ghost of your past decisions dictate your future, throwing good time, money, and energy into a fire simply because you refuse to admit you struck the match. The fifth phrase is the arrogant dismissal, where you claim they just do not understand the full picture. This is an expertise shield replacing real engagement. Instead of addressing a valid critique, you disqualify the person making it. You elevate yourself to a plane of complex understanding that conveniently makes you immune to basic questioning. The sixth phrase is the dangerous assumption that you have seen this work before. This is success transfer replacing fresh evidence. You are taking a victory from 5 years ago in a completely different environment and using it to justify a lazy decision today. You are letting your memory do the work that your current analysis should be doing. The seventh phrase is the ultimate evasion, where you shake your head and say, "It is not that simple." This is complexity armor replacing clarity. When a truth is too sharp or an objection is too accurate, your ego throws up a cloud of smoke. You make the issue artificially complicated so you can hide in the confusion. The eighth phrase is the quiet, stubborn insistence that you will handle it. This is lone wolf pride replacing necessary help. You refuse to delegate, collaborate, or ask for advice because doing so would expose your limitations. You would rather risk the entire outcome than share the credit or admit you are overwhelmed. The alarms in the wild. These phrases are not theoretical. They echo through the halls of every major failure. In your career, you pitch a new strategy and your colleagues immediately point out a massive flaw in the logistics. Instead of thanking them for catching the error, your ego flares up. You walk back to your desk and mutter that they just do not understand the full picture. Later that week, you are overwhelmed with a project that requires a skill set you do not possess. Instead of bringing in an expert, you tell your manager that you will handle it, setting yourself up for a massive public failure simply to protect your image as the smartest guy in the room. When a clear objection threatens your preferred direction, you wave your hand and say it is not that simple, shutting down the debate. In your relationships, these phrases destroy intimacy. You are in an argument with your partner, and they quote something cruel you said yesterday. Instead of owning it, you immediately say you know you said that, but in context, it meant something entirely different. You rewrite history to avoid an apology. When a straightforward apology would solve the entire conflict, you insist it is not that simple, turning a moment of connection into a grueling 2-hour lecture. You replace intimacy with superiority by deciding they just do not understand the full picture of your stress and your burdens. With your money, these phrases are the soundtrack to bankruptcy. You use old wins to justify a massive new risk, telling your broker or your business partner that you have seen this work before. When the investment drops by half, sunk cost takes the wheel, and you tell yourself you have already put too much into this to stop now. When you make a reckless speculative bet without doing the math, you soothe your anxiety by reminding yourself that everyone else is doing it. Look at the culture Ray Dalio built at Bridgewater. He created an environment of radical transparency specifically to hunt down and eliminate these exact phrases. In a culture that forces disagreement and reality checks, you are not allowed to hide behind complexity or social proof. The absence of these phrases marks a strong, durable judgment culture. The goal is not to have less confidence. The goal is to have incredibly clean language under pressure. When your language is clean, your thinking is clean. The live fire interruption protocol. To make this system work, you must install the phrase scan into your daily routine. You must actively listen for these 8 phrases in your speech, your text messages, your emails, and your internal monologue. The moment one of these phrases appears in a meaningful decision, you must treat it as a flashing yellow light. If two of these phrases appear in the exact same decision, it is a mandatory stop signal. You pull the emergency brake immediately. When the alarm sounds, you execute the pause, prove, proceed protocol. First, you pause. You stop defending your position, you close your mouth, and you create physical and mental space. Second, you prove. You force yourself to state the actual evidence for your decision, completely stripped of the ego story. Third, you proceed. You only move forward after the decision survives this clean, unemotional scrutiny. To prove your case, you must ask yourself a brutal diagnostic question tailored to the specific phrase you just caught. If you catch yourself saying everyone else is doing it, you must ask what your actual, independent mathematical reason is for this choice. If you say the timing is not right yet, you must ask yourself exactly how many times you have used that excuse this year. If you say you know you said that, but in context, you must ask yourself if you are genuinely clarifying a point or if you are just cowardly rewriting history. If you say you have already put too much into this, you must ask if you would start this exact same project today from zero. If you say they just do not understand, you must ask if you can answer their specific objection without attacking their qualifications. If you say you have seen this work before, you must list exactly what is fundamentally different about the current situation. If you say it is not that simple, you must name the exact simple truth you are desperately trying to avoid. If you say you will handle it, you must ask if you are protecting the final outcome or just protecting your fragile image. This is how winners treat their own minds. Winners treat their own language as hard evidence in a trial. Losers treat their own language as harmless conversational style. Winners stop dead in their tracks at the phrase. Losers speed up through the phrase, talking louder and faster to drown out the sound of their own internal alarm. The sabotage of the system. Because your ego is fighting for its life, it will try to sabotage this detection system. You will face several predictable traps. The first trap is memorizing the phrases, but completely forgetting to use them. You will feel a surge of intellectual satisfaction from reading this chapter, but tomorrow morning, you will go right back to your old scripts. You fix this by choosing just one phrase to track for the next 7 days. Put your most common phrase on your phone lock screen. Review your last 5 important sent emails for phrase leakage. The second trap is hearing the phrases only in other people. You will become a master at catching your coworkers saying it is not that simple, while remaining totally deaf to your own voice. You fix this by installing a strict rule that you must review your own texts, emails, and recent conversations first before you are allowed to critique anyone else. The third trap is minimizing the phrase. You will catch yourself saying you have seen this work before, and you will tell yourself it is not a big deal, it is just a figure of speech. You fix this by forcing yourself to articulate exactly what action or emotion that phrase is currently protecting. It is never just a figure of speech, it is a shield. The fourth trap is overcorrecting. You will catch a phrase and suddenly distrust every single instinct you have, becoming paralyzed by self-doubt. You fix this by checking the cold evidence instead of attacking your confidence itself. The goal is not to become weak and hesitant. The goal is to verify the math. The final trap is the most dangerous. You will catch the phrase, you will know your ego is driving, and you will act anyway because the momentum feels too good to stop. You fix this by imposing a mandatory 24-hour delay on any major decision that triggers 2 or more of these phrases. You force the adrenaline to leave your system before you sign the contract or send the angry email. The evolution of a clean mind. As you practice the phrase scan, your awareness will sharpen through 3 distinct levels. At the good level, you will catch one of these phrases after a conversation ends. You will walk to your car and realize you just spent 20 minutes telling your team that they do not understand the full picture. You will begin noticing your absolute favorite verbal escape hatch. Your post-decision awareness will get significantly sharper. At the excellent level, you will catch the phrase mid-sentence. You will be halfway through telling your partner that it is not that simple, and you will physically stop talking. You will take a breath, reframe your thought, and proceed without the defense mechanism. Your language will become noticeably less defensive, far more precise, and infinitely more effective. At the best level, you develop real-time ego detection. You stop the thought before it even reaches your vocal cords. The people around you will notice a massive shift in your presence. They will realize that you no longer argue simply to protect your image. Your high-stakes decisions will get incredibly clean because your warning lights finally work. You will navigate complex negotiations and intense personal conflicts with a calm, lethal clarity that other men simply cannot comprehend. You can now hear the alarms. You have the tools to catch your ego leaking through your language. You know the disguises, and you know the verbal triggers. But a massive question remains unanswered. Why do these alarms get so much louder and so much more dangerous after you start winning? Why does your detection system fail the most when your resume looks the best? The answer lies in a hidden charge that your brain levies against your future. There is a silent, compounding price that your past victories place on your future judgment, and if you do not learn how to calculate it, your next big win will be the one that finally breaks you. Chapter 5. Success Tax. You have been sold a massive lie about winning. You believe that every victory makes your judgment sharper. You think that because you won yesterday, your instincts are automatically safer today. You assume that your momentum equals wisdom. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if every single victory you accumulate is quietly adding a hidden charge to your next decision? If you have had a few early victories in your life and now feel an unshakable sense of momentum, this is going to feel deeply personal. I am going to show you how success can make you sloppier without ever making you feel sloppy. You think your wins are proof that your judgment is getting safer. In reality, your wins often reduce the exact friction that used to protect you. When you were starting out, you double-checked your work. You listened to feedback. You respected the possibility of failure. But as you win, that friction disappears. The trap is brutal because success feels like evidence, not danger. You are at your absolute highest risk when your confidence feels the most earned. Your resume can easily become a weapon your ego uses against your future. You must understand that success is useful cash, but it is incredibly dangerous credit. Your track record is context, not permission. The more you win, the less casually you should trust yourself. This concept changes the entire premise of this book. It explains why your ego gets worse after you make progress, not before. It shows why highly capable men need rigid systems far more than they need motivational speeches. We are reframing confidence from a pure asset into an asset that carries a massive hidden liability. We are going to slowly unpack the hidden price your past wins place on your future judgment and how to stop paying it. The mechanics of borrowed certainty. There is a hidden judgment cost created when your past wins inflate your present certainty. This is the success tax. It is the overwhelming tendency to undercheck your own reasoning simply because your prior success feels like absolute proof that you know what you are doing. It is the dangerous drift from earned confidence in one specific area to borrowed certainty in everything else you touch. This happens through a two-part mechanism. First, domain-specific success creates domain-general confidence. You win in one narrow field, and your brain immediately assumes you are a genius in every field. Second, repeated wins completely reduce your emotional respect for uncertainty. When you add the inevitable praise from others into this mix, it accelerates your overtrust in your own instincts. People tell you that you are brilliant, and your ego happily accepts the compliment as a universal truth. This creates a lethal compounding loop. You win. Because you won, you trust yourself faster on the next decision. Because you trust yourself faster, you check yourself less. Because you check yourself less, you miss obvious warning signs. When the project eventually fails, you defend the miss with the authority of your past wins, refusing to admit that your lack of diligence caused the crash. Expertise does not travel nearly as far as confidence does. You have narrow competence, but your ego demands broad expansion. Adjacent fields always feel much safer than they really are. Success in one arena does not give you automatic clarity in another. The researcher Philip Tetlock demonstrated this perfectly in his extensive forecasting work. He showed that highly credentialed experts often fail miserably when they try to predict outcomes just slightly outside their narrow boundaries of expertise. Yet, successful people regularly carry their confidence from one context into completely unrelated domains. Confidence generalizes faster than skill. Your instincts do not deserve a passport just because they won locally. The illusion of the golden touch. This domain drift destroys highly successful men every single day. In your career, you stop preparing for key meetings because you tell yourself you have done this a million times before. You trust your hiring instincts completely after making one single good hire, and you drastically lower your diligence on the next 5 candidates. You assume that because you showed strong performance in ground-level execution, you automatically possess strong judgment in high-level strategy. You confuse the ability to do the work with the ability to direct the war. In your relationships, you bring your workplace confidence into your personal conflicts. You assume that because you are highly persuasive in a boardroom, you are automatically right in your living room. You use your past leadership success to justify your emotional rigidity at home. You start expecting blind trust from your partner without continuing to earn it through humility and active listening. You expect your resume to win your arguments for you. With your money, you size up your risk after a winning streak without increasing the quality of your analysis. You assume your past returns prove your present insight. You make a few good market calls, and suddenly you develop an identity-level faith in your financial intuition. When a trade goes against you, you defend the bad call by citing your old victories instead of looking at the current evidence. You pay the success tax in cold, hard cash. Look at the trajectory of Elon Musk. He is a fascinating example of extraordinary success increasing confidence spillover across multiple domains. His ability to revolutionize the automotive and aerospace industries required a level of self-belief that borders on the impossible. That public, undeniable success amplifies self-belief to a staggering degree. But that same massive domain transfer also creates extreme volatility when applied to social media acquisitions or political commentary. The power of domain transfer is world-changing when it works, but it is incredibly dangerous when public wins amplify self-belief beyond the boundaries of actual expertise. Your scale may be smaller, but the psychological pattern inside your head is identical. The calibration protocol. To stop paying this tax, you must use a detection method called the win transfer test. Whenever you feel an overwhelming sense of certainty about a new venture, you must ask yourself 3 questions. First, what exact domain did I actually win in? Second, what new domain am I now assuming I understand simply because of that past win? Third, what has fundamentally changed in this new situation that my past success does not cover? Once you answer those questions, you run the correction protocol. You must reset, separate, and re-verify. You reset your confidence level back to 0 the moment the context changes. You aggressively separate the old win from the new decision, refusing to let yesterday's trophy dictate today's strategy. Finally, you re-verify your assumptions with fresh, independent evidence before taking any action. You must adopt the calibration rule for your past victories. One past win is an anomaly, not a principle. 2 similar wins show a trend, but they still do not erase the context of the current situation. 3 wins mean you should review the pattern of your success, but you must never worship it. Bigger stakes demand slower thought. A fresh domain means you must manufacture fresh humility. Your confidence should automatically reset when the conditions change. Prior praise is not present proof. The moment your resume enters the argument, you must stop and inspect your reasoning. If you are using your past to justify your present, your ego is driving the car. Winners treat their track record as a warning label. Losers treat their track record as a universal hall pass. Winners slow down when they approach a cliff. Losers speed up and jump simply because they successfully jumped off a smaller cliff yesterday. Healing. The traps inside the momentum. As you try to implement this protocol, your own momentum will try to sabotage you. You will face several distinct traps. First, you might confuse your momentum with actual mastery. You will feel unstoppable, and you will assume that feeling is a substitute for competence. You fix this by forcing yourself to list the exact technical differences between your old win and your current challenge. If you cannot name the differences, you are flying blind. Second, you might scale your risk much faster than you scale your evidence. Because you won small, you will want to bet big immediately. You fix this by forcing yourself to scale your proof before you are allowed to scale your commitment. Your diligence must increase as the stakes increase. Third, you might use your resume to silence your own internal doubt. When a red flag appears in a new project, you will soothe your anxiety by reminding yourself of your past successes. You fix this by completely banning any reference to your past wins during your first review of a new decision. You must evaluate the deal, the hire, or the strategy purely on its own mathematical merits. Fourth, you might assume you possess adjacent expertise. Because you are a brilliant software engineer, you will assume you are naturally gifted at managing human resources. You fix this by explicitly naming the things you have never actually tested in the new domain. You must map your ignorance before you map your strategy. Finally, you might fall for the myth that winners always move fast. You will feel pressure to make snap decisions to maintain your image as a high-velocity operator. You fix this by remembering that real winners get incredibly methodical when the downside gets steep. Speed is a weapon, but speed without calibration is just a faster way to crash. The evolution of unshakable discipline. As you master the win transfer test, your judgment will evolve through 3 distinct levels. At the good level, you will simply stop over-transferring your confidence between domains. You will notice when your old wins are trying to do your current thinking for you. You will make far fewer lazy assumptions after a major success, and you will start treating new challenges with the respect they deserve. At the excellent level, you will recalibrate much faster in new contexts. You will stop treating prior praise as current proof. Your decisions will drastically improve because your confidence will no longer outrun your actual evidence. You will walk into a new industry or a new relationship with the quiet observation of a beginner rather than the loud arrogance of a veteran. At the best level, your wins will keep helping you without ever being allowed to rule you. You will become stronger after success, not weaker from it. You will develop the incredibly rare ability to stay highly dangerous and highly disciplined at the exact same time. You will leverage your past without ever becoming a victim of it. You now know exactly why success can distort your judgment. You understand the hidden tax that your victories place on your future. But simply knowing this concept is not enough if you still only apply the lesson to the people around you. It is easy to see domain drift in your boss or your peers. It is agonizing to see it in the mirror. The next threat you face is the most resilient part of your psychology. It is the part of you that sees ego everywhere except in yourself. Soon, we will turn the lens inward and force a level of self-application that most men spend their entire lives running away from. Chapter 6, Blind Spots. You possess a superpower that is currently destroying your life. You can walk into a room, listen to a conversation for 5 minutes, and instantly diagnose the fragile ego of every single person there. You can see your manager's defensiveness from a mile away. You can perfectly articulate your partner's stubbornness. You can spot your colleague's confirmation bias the moment they open their mouth. You are a master at dissecting the psychological flaws of everyone around you. But the moment you look in the mirror, the screen goes completely blank. This chapter addresses the nastiest, most resilient feature of the human mind. It is the mechanism that allows you to see the trap clearly in everyone else while remaining completely blind to it in yourself. We are going to turn the lens inward and force a level of self-application that will make you deeply uncomfortable. This matters because insight about human behavior is entirely useless if it stops at diagnosing your boss or your spouse. Self-awareness that never actually lands on you is just entertainment, It is not transformation. The hardest truth you will ever have to hold is the one that threatens the story you like to tell about yourself. You are probably much sharper at spotting ego in others than you are at spotting it in yourself. But that does not make you insightful. It makes you unfinished. You can diagnose the entire room and still die from your own blind spot. The easiest person to fool is always the one defending your identity. If the lesson never lands on you, it never happened. This is the breaking point for most ambitious men. Most people absolutely love psychological frameworks right up until the exact moment the framework points a finger at them. When the truth gets too close to your self-image, your ego does not resist by arguing loudly. It resists by redirecting quietly. It changes the camera angle. We are going to dismantle that camera and make self-application completely unavoidable. The architecture of the invisible wall. The engine of your self-deception relies on a specific psychological phenomenon called the bias blind spot. This is the mental system that helps you see flawed reasoning in others while automatically excusing it in yourself. It is a self-protective shift from honest reflection to selective interpretation. When your identity is threatened by a bad decision or a personal failure, your brain reflexively changes the subject to protect you from the pain of reality. Your mind executes this protection through three main evasive moves. The first move is redirecting. When your own failure is under review, you immediately focus on someone else's obvious flaw. You change the subject from your mistake to their reaction. The second move is reframing. You rename your glaring weakness as a subtle nuance or a complex context. You convince yourself that your anger was just passion or your hesitation was just strategic patience. The third move is exception making. You insist that your specific case should not be judged by normal standards because your situation is incredibly unique and unprecedented. Certainty plays a massive role in this invisible wall. You have been taught that high certainty feels like strength. In many defended decisions, high certainty is actually just insulation. It is a thick blanket you throw over your own anxiety. Zero doubt is rarely a sign of perfect clarity. Zero doubt is almost always a sign that you have completely stopped inspecting your own reasoning. The deepest flaw in your self-assessment is that you judge yourself by your internal intentions, but you judge everyone else by their external behavior. You know you meant well, so you excuse the terrible outcome. You do not know what the other person meant, so you judge them harshly on the disaster they caused. That asymmetry perfectly protects your ego. The only fix for this hypocrisy is to pull your thinking out of the swirl of your identity and externalize it into observable language and actions. You must force your ego out into the open where it can be measured against an outside standard. The hypocrisy in your daily calendar. This blind spot creates massive hypocrisy in your daily life. In your career, you can see your manager's defensiveness with crystal clarity, but you call your own exact same behavior strategic confidence. You easily recognize confirmation bias in a colleague who pitches a bad idea, while fiercely defending your own selective research on a project you want to launch. You sit in meetings and criticize the toxic office politics around you, while privately and ruthlessly protecting your own status and territory. In your relationships, the blind spot is even more destructive. You can explain your partner's negative behavioral pattern in forensic detail, but you describe your own identical behavior as a totally justified reaction to the circumstances. You insist that you were simply misunderstood, instead of asking the hard question of whether you were intentionally unclear or evasive. During an argument, you replay their exact words to prove how unreasonable they are, but you conveniently never replay your own condescending tone, your terrible timing, or your immediate defensiveness. With your money, you call other people emotional investors while treating your own desperate attachment to a losing stock as deep conviction. You see herd behavior and panic in strangers on the internet, but you completely fail to see it in your own comfort-seeking financial moves. You frame your own massive losses as long-term patience, while framing the exact same losses in others as pure denial. To see what it looks like to defeat this blind spot, Look at the career of Charlie Munger. He built one of the greatest financial empires in history, not by being a man who never made a mistake, but by being a man who publicly and ruthlessly valued disconfirmation. He was a living example of a mind that actively sought to destroy its own favorite ideas. He understood that durable judgment requires the ability to attack your own conclusions before reality attacks them for you. The standard he set was not flawless brilliance. The standard was rapid, unemotional self-revision. He knew that the only way to survive the markets was to assume his own blind spots were always trying to bankrupt him. The externalization protocol. To catch your blind spots before they ruin you, you must use detection methods that completely remove your intentions from the equation. The first method is the outsider test. You take your most defended, highly charged current decision and you ask yourself a simple question. If someone I deeply respected told me this exact same story, what would I tell him to do? You must write the answer down in one single sentence. Then, you look at that piece of paper and compare that objective advice to what you are actually doing in your life right now. The gap between that sentence and your behavior is the exact size of your ego. The second method is the language audit. You review your last week of emails, text messages, meeting notes, and internal scripts. You actively count how many times the 8 phrases of rationalization appeared in your communication. You do not judge yourself for finding them. You simply treat the count as raw data, not as a moral verdict on your character. If the phrases are there, the contamination is there. The third method is the certainty check. You rate your internal certainty on a highly defended decision on a scale from 1 to 10. If you rate yourself at a 9 or a 10, you automatically owe that decision extra scrutiny. Perfect certainty is a yellow light, not a green light. When you hit a 10, you must immediately ask yourself what specific piece of data you are actively refusing to see. The correction protocol for all of these methods is to observe, externalize, and compare. You observe your actual words, not your noble feelings. You externalize them into writing so your brain cannot rewrite them in real time. You compare your behavior with the cold advice you would give a friend. Discomfort during this process means you are close to something incredibly useful. If you instantly think of someone else's flaws while reading this chapter, you must violently bring the focus back to yourself. Winners apply the blade inward first. Losers collect frameworks to diagnose everyone else. Winners respect discomfort because it signals growth, while losers flee discomfort because it threatens their fragile identity. The sabotage of self-reflection. Turning the lens inward is dangerous work, and your mind will try to sabotage the process to protect you from the pain of self-awareness. You will face several distinct failure modes. First, you might use self-analysis to attack yourself. You will find a blind spot and use it to prove that you are a terrible leader, a bad partner, or a failure. You fix this by strictly scoring your patterns and your language instead of judging your fundamental worth as a man. You are auditing a machine, not your soul. Second, you might dodge the hardest decision. When you run the outsider test, you will intentionally pick a minor, low-stakes problem to analyze so you can feel good about doing the work without actually facing any real risk. You fix this by installing a rule that you must always choose the issue you least want to inspect first. The resistance points directly to the cure. Third, you might intellectualize instead of observing. You will sit in a chair and think deep, philosophical thoughts about the nature of your biases, completely ignoring the angry text message you just sent your business partner. You fix this by reviewing actual messages, actual spoken words, and actual physical behavior. Philosophy is a hiding place. Evidence is a mirror. Fourth, you might continue to trust your intention over your outcome. You will see the damage you caused, but you will still demand credit because you meant to do the right thing. You fix this by asking what your behavior actually communicated to the other person, completely disregarding what you meant internally. Your intentions do not pay the bills, and they do not repair broken trust. Finally, you might simply stop when the discomfort rises. The moment you realize you have been lying to yourself for 6 months about a failing project, the psychological pain will spike, and you will want to close the book and go watch television. You fix this by treating that exact spike of discomfort as the entry point to the truth, not the signal to exit the room. The evolution of the unfiltered mind. As you practice externalizing your blind spots, your self-honesty will evolve through 3 distinct levels. At the good level, you will begin to catch one defended decision each week. You will start to notice the exact moments where your internal self-story drastically differs from your actual observable behavior. Your self-observation will become significantly less emotional and much more clinically accurate. You will stop taking your own mistakes so personally. At the excellent level, you will identify your own distortions before you act on them. You will stop using the word context as a universal escape hatch for your bad behavior. Your correction speed will drastically increase because your baseline level of denial will decrease. You will be able to look at a massive failure, isolate your exact contribution to the disaster, and pivot your strategy without spending 3 days in a dark room feeling sorry for yourself. At the best level, brutal self-honesty will actually start to feel like strength rather than humiliation. You will become the incredibly rare man who can examine his own deepest flaws without collapsing into shame and without performing a fake apology for the crowd. Your judgment will sharpen to a lethal edge because your blind spots will officially stop running on autopilot. You will see reality exactly as it is, unclouded by the desperate need to be the hero of every story. You can now see yourself more clearly than you ever have before. You know how to pull your ego out of the shadows and force it into the light. But there is a fatal flaw in everything you have learned so far. Insight without repetition fades incredibly fast. You can feel completely transformed today, and by next Thursday, the stress of your life will push you right back into your old defended patterns. Motivation evaporates. Good intentions disappear under the weight of a heavy workload. To survive your own mind, you need a structure that catches your ego every single week, not just on the days when your motivation happens to be high. You need a machine to fight a machine. Soon, we will build the exact recurring operating system that separates the men who occasionally read about self-awareness from the men who actually command their own future. Chapter 7, Weekly Audit. You can understand every single concept in this book perfectly, feel a massive surge of inspiration today, and still drift right back into your old destructive traps by Thursday afternoon. Insight without a system gets eaten alive by the week. Motivation is incredibly unreliable. It spikes when you read a good book or listen to a powerful podcast, but it vanishes the moment your boss challenges your project or your partner criticizes your tone. If you rely on your mood to keep your ego in check, your ego will win every single time. You do not need another burst of inspiration. You need a maintenance habit that is strong enough to survive your worst moods. If you do not actively revisit your decisions, your ego will quietly rewrite them for you. It will smooth over the rough edges, erase your defensiveness from the record, and convince you that you handled everything perfectly. What you do not audit, your ego will own. This chapter turns everything you have learned into a recurring behavioral system. We are moving from theory into decision hygiene. This is the weekly discipline that separates the men who occasionally experience a fleeting moment of self-awareness from the men who actually possess real self-command. Your future is built in your reviews, not just in your initial decisions. We are going to build a short, repeatable practice that catches your contaminated thinking before it hardens into a permanent mistake. The architecture of feedback. Systems beat moods. People do not become more rational simply because they want to be more rational. They become more rational when they install repeated checkpoints that make distortion impossible to hide. The weekly ego audit is a 30-minute recurring review of your most important recent decisions. It is a practical, mechanical system for spotting the phrases, the masks, and the defended reasoning we have discussed. It is the bridge that turns your passive awareness into active correction. We do this weekly because daily review quickly becomes obsessive and unsustainable. If you analyze every single thought you have every day, you will paralyze yourself. Monthly review, on the other hand, is far too slow. By the time 30 days have passed, the story has already hardened in your mind, and the damage is already done. Weekly is the absolute sweet spot. It creates enough distance from the heat of the moment to allow you to notice patterns objectively, but not so much distance that your memory becomes useless. You must understand what this audit is not. It is not vague journaling about your feelings. It is not a session of self-punishment where you beat yourself up for being flawed. It is not an emotional confession booth. It is a cold, mechanical review of your decision-making process. It relies on the basic principle of feedback loops. What gets reviewed gets improved. What gets named gets managed. What gets measured stops feeling mystical. By converting your invisible ego contamination into observable signals, you can finally treat your judgment like a trainable skill rather than a fixed personality trait. The operating rule for this audit is simple. It must be short enough to sustain, sharp enough to actually matter, and repeated enough to compound over time. You will track a very specific scoreboard. You will count the number of major decisions you review, the number of phrases you detect, the number of masks you identify, and you will select exactly one correction action to take in the coming week. The audit in the trenches. This system is designed for the reality of your daily life. In your career, you will sit down on Sunday and review the Tuesday meeting where you became highly defensive after your team pushed back on your timeline. You will review the job decision you keep delaying, finally forcing yourself to admit that you are using timing as an excuse for fear. You will review a strategy choice you made on Thursday that triggered 2 or more of the warning phrases, and you will realize that you made the choice purely to protect your status. In your relationships, you will review the argument you had on Wednesday night, where you pushed relentlessly to win the debate instead of trying to resolve the actual conflict. You will review the apology you delayed giving on Friday because your pride simply resisted saying the words. You will review the moment where you used complexity to replace honesty, confusing your partner just so you could escape accountability. With your money, you will review a recent trade, bet, or spending decision that felt unusually certain to you. You will review the position you absolutely refuse to exit, forcing yourself to look at the sunk cost driving your paralysis. You will review a financial move you made that was heavily influenced by your old wins rather than the current objective evidence in front of you. Look at how Dalio operates. He is a prime example of building rigid decision systems rather than trusting unaudited instinct. He built an entire corporate culture around structured feedback and mandatory review. He understands that elite performance is never mood-driven. It is always system-driven. What works at the highest levels of finance and leadership is not sudden inspiration. It is the relentless, mechanical review of your own thinking. The 4-part protocol. The weekly ego audit consists of 4 distinct steps. Step 1 is the phrase scan. You look back at your week and select your 3 biggest decisions or conflicts. You review your memory, your text messages, and your emails regarding those 3 events. You actively mark which of the 8 phrases appeared in your thinking or your language. If you find any decision that contains 2 or more of those phrases, you immediately flag that decision as contaminated. Step 2 is mask identification. For each flagged decision, you must name which of the 6 masks was active. You write the mask down in one short phrase. You do not write a paragraph explaining it. You just write the label. Then, you explicitly note what specific emotion or identity threat that mask was protecting you from. You force yourself to admit that you were protecting yourself from shame, fear, or the loss of control. Step 3 is the outsider test. You pick your single most defended current position from the week. You ask yourself what exact advice you would give to someone you deeply respected if they were in the exact same situation. You write that advice down, and then you brutally compare that advice with your actual behavior. Step 4 is pre-commitment. You choose exactly one rationalization that you absolutely refuse to allow yourself to use in the coming week. You write down the specific trigger you will watch for, and you define one visible, concrete action you will take the moment that trigger appears. You do not promise to be better. You promise to execute a specific action. There are tricks to making this protocol stick. You must keep the entire audit under 30 minutes. If it takes longer, you will eventually stop doing it. You must strictly limit the review to 3 decisions so you do not get overwhelmed. You must do it at the exact same time every single week, building a permanent anchor in your schedule. You must always end with an action, never with insight alone. Store the template on your phone so you can run the audit with zero friction, no matter where you are. Winners review their week before their week reviews them. Losers rely on their memory and their mood, hoping they will naturally get better over time. Winners actively build evidence against their own blind spots. The sabotage of the system. Because this audit is so effective, your ego will try to destroy the habit. You will face several predictable failure modes. First, you might make the audit way too long. You will try to review every single conversation you had all week. You will get exhausted after an hour, and you will never do it again. You fix this by strictly reviewing only 3 significant decisions and selecting only 1 correction action. Keep it lean. Second, you might skip the audit entirely after a particularly messy week. When you know you made terrible decisions and acted defensively, the last thing you want to do is sit down and look at the data. You fix this by treating your bad weeks as premium material. A bad week is not a reason to avoid the process. A bad week is the exact reason the process exists. Third, you might turn the audit into a session of self-shaming. You will look at your mistakes and use them to attack your own character. You fix this by forcing yourself to describe mechanisms and patterns instead of moralizing about yourself. You are a mechanic looking at an engine, not a judge handing down a sentence. Fourth, you might notice all the patterns perfectly, but completely avoid taking any action. You will build a beautiful list of your flaws and then change absolutely nothing about your behavior. You fix this by attaching one highly visible deadline to each weekly correction. Finally, you might do the audit inconsistently. You will do it on Tuesday one week, skip a week, and then try to do it on a Friday. You fix this by pairing the audit with a stable, unbreakable weekly anchor. Do it every Sunday morning with your coffee or every Sunday evening before you plan your week. Tie it to something that already happens without fail. The evolution of self-command. As you run this audit week after week, your judgment will evolve through 3 distinct levels. At the good level, you will start noticing repeated patterns month to month. You will realize that you always use the timing excuse when dealing with a specific client, or that you always get defensive when your partner brings up a specific topic. You will catch small ego leaks before they spread into massive problems. You will finally gain honest, objective weekly data about your own judgment. At the excellent level, your overall decision quality will drastically improve because your patterns will stop remaining invisible. You will correct your course much faster with significantly less emotional friction. You will stop fighting yourself. You will begin to trust your systems far more than you trust your moods, knowing that the audit will catch whatever your emotions try to hide. At the best level, you will build a rock-solid reputation for clean, rapid self-correction. The people around you will notice that you do not defend your mistakes anymore. Your ego will lose all the dark room it needs to operate unnoticed. Your judgment will officially become a trained, lethal discipline rather than a random personality guess. The audit gives you the weekly operating system you need to survive your own mind. You now have the mechanism, the masks, the phrases, the blind spot tests, and the recurring structure to hold it all together. But knowing the system and running it in the quiet of your living room is very different from deploying it when the pressure is on. You need to use these tools where mistakes cost the absolute most. Soon, we will take this entire framework and apply it directly to the high-stakes reality of your career, your relationships, and your money. Chapter 8, Hard Calls. You spend an enormous amount of energy trying to optimize your daily routine. You track your habits, you manage your schedule, and you try to make 100 tiny perfect choices every single day. You have been led to believe that success is simply the accumulation of these micro decisions. But your biggest losses in life will never come from those tiny moments. You do not ruin your life by making a minor scheduling error on a Tuesday afternoon. You ruin your life by making one massive, ego-driven miscalculation that echoes for the next decade. We are about to enter the territory of the hard calls. These are the rare, heavy, trajectory-shifting choices where your identity is completely on the line. I'm not going to reveal the entire framework right away because you need to understand the gravity of what we are dealing with first. You have learned the hidden mechanisms of your mind. You know the disguises your ego wears. You know the exact phrases that signal a rationalization. You even have a weekly system to audit your past behavior. But all of that theoretical knowledge is completely useless if it stays on the shelf. Frameworks that stay abstract become nothing more than intellectual decoration. You need deployment rules. You need to know exactly how to use this system under extreme pressure. In the exact moments where a mistake will cost you years of your life, the trust of the people you love, or a massive amount of your capital. The weight of identity. Why do these specific decisions attract so much ego? It is because high-stakes decisions are always identity-loaded decisions. We are going to focus exclusively on the three arenas where your ego does the absolute most damage: your career, your relationships, and your money. In each of these domains, your mind has an overwhelming incentive to distort reality because the perceived threat is so much larger than normal. Your career is tied directly to your status, your ambition, and your public competence. Your relationships are tied to your pride, your deepest insecurities, and your emotional exposure. Your money is tied to your sense of control, your fear of failure, and your ultimate survival. Because the stakes feel so incredibly large in these three arenas, the exact same psychological machinery we have discussed appears, but it wears different costumes and carries catastrophic consequences. A sharp mind without a filter becomes incredibly dangerous at scale. You are never judged by your best, most brilliant insights. You are judged by your worst, uncorrected major decisions. Big stakes magnify small ego leaks. A high performer with bad filters is nothing more than a future cautionary tale. The costliest decisions you will ever make are the ones your ego absolutely refuses to label honestly. You do not need ego-proofing everywhere equally. You do not need to become hesitant and analytical about every minor choice in your day. You need to become disciplined exactly where the cliff is real. The architecture of the pause. To survive these cliffs, you must build what we call the ego-proof decision. This is not a magical state of perfect enlightenment. It is a highly structured pause that drastically reduces your capacity for self-deception right before you make a major commitment. It is a repeatable way to keep your pride from driving the final call. When you face a massive choice in your career, your relationships, or your finances, you must run your thinking through a brutal gauntlet of 4 specific questions. You must ask yourself which of the 8 phrases is currently active in your vocabulary. You must ask yourself which of the 6 masks is currently disguising your true motives. You must identify the exact identity threat that is present in the room. And finally, you must ask yourself what future cost you will inevitably pay if the current version of you is completely wrong. When you are uncertain, you must deploy the rule of reversible moves. You must choose the absolute smallest move that preserves your ability to learn. You must never bet your entire identity or your entire bank account when a much smaller test is possible. You are delaying your pride, not your progress. The 3 arenas of destruction. Let us look at how this actually plays out in the wild. In your career, a hard call looks like staying in the wrong executive role for 5 years simply because leaving feels like a public confession of failure. It looks like forcing a doomed strategy through the pipeline just because your name is attached to the slide deck and you refuse to back down. It looks like refusing to ask for necessary help because telling your board that you will handle it feels so much stronger than admitting you are out of your depth. In your relationships, a hard call looks like turning a simple repair conversation into a grueling courtroom cross-examination. It looks like hiding behind complex nuance instead of looking your partner in the eye and giving a clean, unconditional apology. It looks like treating honest feedback from the person who loves you as an act of profound disrespect instead of treating it as vital data. With your money, a hard call looks like doubling down on a bleeding investment simply because you have seen this specific setup work before in a totally different market. It looks like waiting forever to launch your business because the timing is not right yet. It looks like holding an incredibly weak position because you have already put too much capital into it to walk away. Consider the legacy of Steve Jobs. He is the ultimate nuanced example of this dynamic. His extreme, uncompromising conviction created world-changing products and revolutionized multiple industries. But that exact same absolute certainty also created incredibly costly relational friction, massive internal wars, and periods of profound isolation. His brilliance was undeniable. But the lesson is that high standards become deeply destructive the moment self-correction disappears. Brilliance does not cancel your need for filters. It actually amplifies it. The domain filters. You must apply a specific filter to each of these three domains. When you face a career decision, you must ask whether the choice actually protects your growth or merely protects your image. You must check whether you only gathered evidence that supports staying, leaving, or pushing your agenda. You must identify whether sunk cost logic or exception logic is currently active in your reasoning. Remember that blind loyalty to a company or a past decision is not the same thing as inertia. When you face a relationship decision, you must ask whether you are genuinely trying to resolve the conflict or if you are just desperately trying to win the argument. You must listen closely to your own voice for the phrases that claim it is not that simple or that they just do not understand the full picture. You must force yourself to deliver one plain, unadorned sentence of accountability before you are allowed to launch into any long explanation. If a simple apology keeps turning into a 20-minute speech, your ego is entirely in charge. When you face a money decision, you must ask whether your current research actually matches your current level of confidence. You must listen for the phrases that claim you have seen this work before or that you have already put too much into this. You must aggressively separate your prior financial wins from the present market conditions. Your confidence must match your current homework, never your past memory. The protocol of de-risking. The correction protocol for all three of these domains is identical. You delay, you disconfirm, and you de-risk. You mandate a delay on your final commitment the moment two or more warning signals appear in your thinking. You actively seek out one incredibly strong piece of disconfirming evidence that completely contradicts your brilliant plan. And you make the absolute smallest intelligent next move first. In all three domains, the ultimate rule is that if your identity is on the line, you must slow down. A high emotional charge always means you should have extremely low trust in your first instincts. Winners use these filters exactly where the stakes are the highest. Losers trust their vibes the most when the downside is the biggest. Winners aggressively protect their future flexibility. Losers aggressively protect their present pride. The sabotage of application. As you take this system into the real world, you will encounter several predictable traps. You might apply the filter only to your money and completely ignore your relationships. You will do this because financial numbers are cold and visible, while emotional conflicts are messy and painful. You fix this by forcing yourself to use the framework exactly where your emotions spike the fastest, not just where your spreadsheets are open. You might confuse this necessary caution with weakness. You will feel like slowing down makes you less of a dominant operator. You fix this by remembering that a disciplined, calculated pause is the ultimate power move. Only fragile men rush into minefields to prove they are brave. You might demand perfect certainty before acting, using the filter as an excuse to never make a decision at all. You fix this by aiming for clean reasoning and reversible steps, completely abandoning the fantasy of impossible certainty. You might run the tool after the decision is already made, using it to justify what you just did instead of using it to guide what you're about to do. You fix this by attaching the filter to any decision that crosses a defined personal risk threshold before the contract is signed or the words are spoken. Finally, you might become incredibly rigid and over-analytical, turning every conversation into a forensic audit. You fix this by always choosing the smallest reversible action instead of getting trapped in endless, paralyzing review. The evolution of the operator. As you deploy these filters in the real world, your life will change through 3 distinct levels. At the good level, you will successfully avoid one major, ego-driven error in a high-stakes area. You will delay a costly business decision or a relationship-ending argument just long enough for your clarity to rise above your pride. You will finally stop letting your fragile identity make the final call. At the excellent level, the people around you will begin to notice a profound shift. They will see cleaner judgment and drastically lower defensiveness. Your career moves, your relationship dynamics, and your financial allocations will show almost zero ego contamination. You will become vastly more accurate under extreme pressure, not just more confident. At the best level, you become the rare man who can completely change direction without losing a single ounce of authority. Your decision quality will compound exponentially because your ego no longer owns the highest stakes moments of your life. You will keep your absolute edge, your ambition, and your drive while permanently removing the single greatest source of self-sabotage known to high performers. You now possess the complete decision system. You know the trap, the engine, the masks, the phrases, the blind spots, the weekly audit, and the high-stakes filters. You have every single tool you need to protect your future from your own mind. But there is one final, massive task remaining. Having the tools is not the same thing as becoming the man who uses them by default. If you stop here, you will eventually put these tools down and revert to the exact same person you were before you read the first page. The last threat you face is not a lack of knowledge. The final threat is the terrifying gravitational pull of your old self. Soon, we will cross the final bridge, fusing everything you have learned into a completely new operating identity, where defending your pride is replaced by something far more dangerous and far more permanent. Chapter 9. Stop defending. You have reached the end of the manual, but you have not reached the end of the war. Most men read a book like this, feel a temporary surge of intellectual superiority, put it on a shelf, and change absolutely nothing about their lives. They mistake the fleeting feeling of understanding a concept for the actual hard work of transformation. I am not going to let you do that. You did not read this far just to acquire a new vocabulary of cognitive biases so you can sound smarter at dinner parties. You are here to fundamentally change the way you operate. The goal of this entire system was never to make you timid, vague, or endlessly self-doubting. The goal was to help you stop treating the act of being wrong as a lethal threat to your manhood, your intelligence, or your status. We are going to fuse every single tool you have learned into a completely new operating identity. By the time you finish this chapter, you will know exactly what to do tonight, what to do tomorrow, and how to become a man who no longer needs to defend his pride because his process is unbreakable. The arsenal of the unburdened mind. Let us take a hard look at the weapons you have acquired. You started this journey by facing the core lesson that your intelligence is a mercenary. It can serve the truth, or it can serve your ego, and it will gladly build a flawless defense for a terrible decision if you let it. You learned the brutal reality that your past wins are not just trophies. They are the exact raw materials your mind uses to strengthen your future blind spots. You learned that confidence, without a structured correction mechanism, is just a countdown to an incredibly expensive disaster. To fight this, you built a tactical system. You now understand the rationalization engine, the hidden machine that picks a destination based on pride and builds a logical route to get there. You can spot the 6 masks your ego wears to survive scrutiny, recognizing when your stubbornness is disguising itself as a principled stand or when your fear is disguising itself as strategic timing. You have memorized the 8 phrases, giving you an audible, real-time alarm system that triggers the moment your reasoning shifts from inquiry to defense. You know how the blind spot machine operates, and you know how to use the outsider test to force your ego into the light. You possess the weekly ego audit, a mechanical maintenance routine that catches your contaminated thinking before it hardens into a permanent mistake. And you know how to execute an ego-proof decision, slowing down and filtering your choices exactly when the stakes are the highest. Your new operating principle is absolute. You must stop worshiping certainty. You must start respecting correction. You are building a life where being wrong is entirely survivable and instantly fixable. You are no longer a man who needs to look right at all costs. You are a man who is obsessed with getting it right, no matter whose idea wins. The power of real-time interruption. This new identity empowers you in ways that pure intelligence never could. You can now catch your ego in real time. You do not have to wait for a project to fail or a relationship to end to realize you are acting out of pride. You can physically hear yourself getting defensive in the middle of a sentence. You can see the exact moment when your wounded pride tries to disguise itself as a high standard. Because you have this real-time detection, you can interrupt bad decisions before they harden into actions. You can literally stop talking, take a breath, and completely change the trajectory of a negotiation or an argument. The greatest superpower you have gained is the ability to separate your identity from your judgment. For most of your life, being wrong felt like being weak. Admitting a mistake felt like a total collapse of your authority. That is why you fought so hard to defend every single position. But now, you understand that your worth as a man is not tied to your first instinct. Correction no longer feels like a collapse. It feels like an upgrade. You can fiercely protect your self-respect without ever needing to defend false certainty. Because of this separation, you will actually build a much stronger, deeper trust in your own decisions. You will not trust yourself because you always feel a magical sense of perfect certainty. You will trust yourself because you now have a ruthless, objective method. You know that any decision that survives your filters is a clean decision. Clean process creates real, durable confidence. You stop guessing and you start executing. The end of the courtroom. The impact this will have on your relationships is staggering. For years, you have likely turned every conflict into a trial. You treated your partner, your friends, and your colleagues like hostile witnesses. But now, the courtroom is officially closed. You stop cross-examining the people you care about. When someone brings you a grievance, you actually listen instead of silently loading your rebuttal. You ask what is true about their complaint before you ask how you can win the argument. You completely stop using your massive vocabulary and your complex logic to avoid basic accountability. Because you drop the armor, you become infinitely easier to trust. People around you will feel a massive shift in your energy. They will realize that they no longer have to manage your fragile ego before they tell you the truth. They will feel safe bringing you bad news, which means you will finally stop flying blind. You will become vastly less reactive to feedback. When you do make a mistake, your apologies will get shorter, cleaner, and entirely believable. You will stop adding the word, but to the end of every apology. You will replace the exhausting need for dominance with the quiet power of reliability. You will stop demanding blind loyalty while fiercely resisting any correction. You will start earning deep, permanent respect through your honesty under pressure. You will simply become less exhausting to live with and less exhausting to work with. The people around you will stop bracing for impact every time they disagree with you. The art of the clean pivot. With this system installed, you will be able to achieve things that were psychologically impossible for you a month ago. You will catch the mask before it shapes the outcome. You will identify your favorite disguise so quickly that it will almost make you laugh. You will be able to name the exact identity threat driving a sudden urge to quit a project or fire a vendor. You will see the fear of humiliation hiding behind your anger, and you will dismantle it on the spot. You will gain the incredibly rare ability to change your mind publicly without losing a single ounce of status. In the past, pivoting felt like a public surrender. Now, you can update your worldview the moment the evidence improves. You can correct your course without making it a dramatic, emotional event. You will be deeply respected by your board, your team, and your peers for your clean revision, rather than being secretly despised for your stubbornness. People follow a man who navigates by the truth far more willingly than they follow a man who navigates by his ego. You will make hard decisions with almost zero ego noise. Your career decisions will become less performative. You will stop taking jobs or launching projects just to prove a point to people who do not even care about you. Your relationship decisions will become less defensive. You will stop protecting your pride at the expense of your intimacy. Your money decisions will become completely uncontaminated by your old wins. You will look at the market with cold, clear eyes, unburdened by the ghost of your past successes. The physics of positive compounding. If you sustain this practice, you will experience the physics of positive compounding. Just as unchecked ego compounds into massive failure, clean correction compounds into effortless execution. Your pattern recognition will speed up dramatically. The 8 phrases will become so loud to your ear that they will sound like sirens. The 6 masks will become so obvious that you will spot them in a fraction of a second. The blind spots that used to run your life will become completely visible. As your recognition speeds up, your correction will become significantly less emotional. You will need less and less internal drama to change your course. You will not need to spend 2 days brooding in your office after realizing you made a bad call. You will recover instantly. Course correction will start to feel as normal and routine as breathing. It will completely lose its sting. Your weekly ego audit will become sharper and shorter. Because you are catching the leaks in real time throughout the week, you will spend far less time explaining your failures on Sunday and far more time fixing your systems. You will achieve vastly more accuracy with a fraction of the friction. This positive compounding creates a beautiful upward spiral. Better calibration produces better decisions. Better decisions produce a much more stable, quiet form of confidence. And that stable confidence requires absolutely no ego theater to sustain itself. You will get better results with less wasted force. You will stop fighting the friction of your own mind and start using all of your energy to actually build your empire. Your immediate marching orders. This is where the theory ends and the execution begins. I am giving you your immediate marching orders. Tonight, before you go to sleep, you must take one immediate action. I want you to pick the single decision in your life right now that you feel the absolute most certain about, the one you would bet your life on. Run the 8 phrases against it. Identify which of the 6 masks might be involved. Ask yourself what brutal, objective advice you would give someone else in the exact same situation. Test your strongest pillar first. This week, you must make your first system move. You must open your calendar right now and schedule your first weekly ego audit. Block out 30 minutes on Sunday. Treat that appointment with the same reverence you would treat a meeting with your biggest investor. Then, choose exactly one of the 8 phrases to watch for over the next 7 days. Define one visible, physical correction you will make the moment that phrase leaves your mouth. Your new rule going forward is non-negotiable. Strong certainty requires stronger scrutiny. Big stakes demand a slower ego and a cleaner process. Being right in the moment matters infinitely less than getting it right over the long term. You are no longer allowed to operate on autopilot. The ultimate flex of a dangerous man. You do not need to become a different species of man to pull this off. You do not need to lose your edge, your ambition, or your drive. You simply need to become a much more honest, supervised version of the man you already are. You must realize that true strength is never the absence of error. True strength is the speed of your correction. This is the final divide between winning and losing. Losers worship the feeling of being right. They protect their fragile pride until it costs them their capital, their careers, and their families. Winners do not care about the feeling of being right. Winners let the cold, hard truth improve them faster than their ego can trap them. Look at the titans who actually survived the test of time. Charlie Munger built a legacy not by being flawless, but by making a daily habit of destroying his own best-loved ideas the moment reality proved them wrong. Ray Dalio built a financial fortress not by trusting his gut, but by building rigid, ruthless systems that exposed his own blind spots to the light of day. The ultimate lesson from the men who win and keep winning is that durable strength is completely inseparable from structured self-correction. Stop defending, start detecting. Your future does not need a prouder version of you. It needs a cleaner thinking version of you. The intelligence, the drive, and the ambition that got you to this exact moment in your life are incredible assets. But the man who got you here is simply not enough for what comes next. Your next level of wealth, your next level of leadership, and your next level of peace will only begin the exact moment your ego stops being your boss. Do not admire this system, run it. Do not wait for a massive crisis to force your hand. Start tonight.